cold as a razor blade.
Back for another episode of The Snake Pit. But if you're watching here on YouTube, you can tell that I'm not with Jake the Snake Roberts today. Instead, I am with both members of Demolition, Barry Darso, Bill Eady, Axe and Smash. Guys, thank you so much for being here today.
Our pleasure.
Marcus, great to meet you and great to be on your show.
Man, I really, really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to us today. And by the way, folks, if you enjoy what we do here today, you can get more from Bill and Barry on their new podcast, Demo Pod, which is available on YouTube and on your podcast app. Guys, what do you think of entering the podcast world so far?
Well, it's been an adventure. I'm a neophyte at all this technical stuff, but Barry's a little more advanced than I am.
And if I'm more advanced, we're in trouble because I don't have a clue. But in fact, the first two podcasts, like I was telling you earlier, I was in my camper and the speakers were going nuts and everything. And on the first couple, Bill's camera was kind of moving. So we're slowly moving into the podcast world. But, you know, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, right?
Yeah. Well, I listened to the first episode, and so far so good, guys. I think you guys are off on to a great start, and I'm hearing wonderful things online about what you guys are doing. So yeah, we'll treat this episode as almost like a preview of what folks can expect from Demo Pod, right?
Sounds good.
Hope so.
Well, let's get going into these notes. I've told you guys offline, we're probably just going to do like a little bit of a review of your time in the WWF. So yeah, we can get moving here. I guess my first question is for you, Mr. Eady. Can you tell our listeners about where the concept for the Demolition team came from?
Well, Randy Colley came up with the idea, and I don't know if the people remember that Randy was in there as the Moondogs before. And then he was working as a single, and then he came up with the concept, I think basically off of the movies that were out at that particular time. And he presented it to me, and I was going back and forth to Japan, and I was scheduled to make a trip to Japan at that time, and we presented it to Vince, and Vince liked the idea. The only bad thing was the characters were going to get over, but they were not going to get over because people recognized Randy at that time. I had been in there during that period of time as a mass superstar, so they had no facial recognition. But of course, Randy was the tag team champions for a number of years as the Bulldogs, and people, surely knew what he looked like. So it was unfortunate we had two events and for TV tapings, and both of them, the crowd reaction was positive for the characters as we entered the arena and got into the ring. But as soon as we took the outer masks off, everybody recognized Randy and it started saying, Moondog, Moondog, Moondog. So I felt that because he developed it, I would step aside. Because I was going back to Japan back and forth anyway and had a standing agreement with them. And he said, no, I think you're right. They're going to recognize me. And he graciously stepped aside, and we approached Vince, said we need a new member. The characters are going to get over. I think that they'll do very well, but they're not going to do well with Randy. He said, I agree. I've watched it. I've listened to the fans. We got to find a new partner. Well, at that time, he proposed three other guys that were in the territory, very similar to Randy's situation. And I said, Vince, it's not going to work. They're going to know them too. So that's when I went to Japan, and then Barry was involved in the next move.
Now, I am curious. You'd mentioned that, as you were working under a hood before, and now you're making the transition to going out there with face paint on. Any objections to going out there with paint, or what did you think about working in paint?
Well, it was a big change for me. I simply knew that the characters were going to work. I knew that the position that we would be in, we'd make money. If it was just an opening position, opening match, I wasn't going to agree to it. But Vince was 150% behind it. So I knew, especially in WWF at that time, there was an opportunity for us to make money.
Now, Barry, he had mentioned that you got involved, and I'm curious, what are the circumstances surrounding making the jump from JCP to the WWF for you?
So I worked a big program when I was partners with Ivan Nikita, and I was working a big program with the Rock and Roll Express. And for a couple of months, we were having matches every night with them, tearing the house down, and it was coming up to a big show. And what had happened was somehow Nikita ended up, he was going to work with Flair, and then it ended up being where Flair ended up working with somebody else. So Dusty came up to me and said, Barry, he says, I want you to work with Sam Houston, and I want Nikita to work with the Rock and Roll Express. And I said to Dusty, I said, Dusty, I worked my ass off for this match, and now you're going to put me in a lesser match. And he says, you're going to make the same amount of money. It's going to be no big deal, but just, help me out. I want you to work with Sam Houston. You work really well with him. So I agreed with it. And then a couple of weeks later, we're in the dressing room, and we got our paychecks. It was at TV, so we're all sitting around TV doing our interviews and everything. And I got my paycheck, and I looked at it, and I just went, holy cow, this is a terrible payoff. And I was sitting by Ivan, and Ivan's looking at his paycheck, kind of, hiding it from me. And I don't ever ask what everybody gets paid, but I knew my situation wasn't what we agreed upon. So I said, Ivan, I got to ask you how much you got paid. And he goes, Crush. He says, I don't want to tell you. And I said, Ivan, I got to know. And he said, all right, here's what I got. And I looked at it and I went, holy shit. And he looked right at me and he says, Crush, do not do what you're going to do. And I said, Ivan, I got it. So I walked down the hallway and I got into Dusty's office, knocked on the door. I said, Dusty, I got to talk to you. And he already knew what was going to go on because everybody had their paychecks and I'm the one that went to talk to him. Mm-hmm. And we were talking and he said, Barry, he says, I'm doing everything I can to get your money. And I said, but Dusty, you promised me that match was going to pay the same. And he said, well, Barry, Jimmy's looking at it like, you're on the fourth match and the fourth match makes this much money and the, seventh match makes this much money. And I said, I don't care, but that's not what we agreed upon. And so he says, it's out of his hands. You're going to have to go talk to Jimmy. So I went out of the room and I knocked on the door at Jimmy, and Jimmy says, I'm busy. I said, no. I said, I don't care if you're busy or not. I went in there, closed the door. I was ready to wring his neck because just the attitude, I could just see it on him. He knew what I was there. He probably heard what I'm saying to Dusty. And I said, Jimmy, this isn't what was agreed upon. And, and right away he says, Barry, it doesn't matter. You were on this match. That's what that match gets paid. And it ended up coming down to where I said, Jimmy, I said, you lied to me. You're cheating me. I'm putting my notice in, and I put in like a 2-week notice, whatever it was. And he said something else that really pissed me off. So I said, you know what? I'm done today. I'm done. So I walked out of there and I went in, I said goodbye to everybody, did everything. And I thought, hey, I got a couple of weeks off, maybe I can call somebody, go to Japan or go somewhere. So Earl Hebner calls me up and he says, Barry, he says, you want me to talk to Vince? Dave's up there. He's an agent. And I said, yeah, I'd love to go to the WWF. And, not thinking anything of it. And then I was in Ricky Steamboat's gym training. And Ricky came up to me. He says, I heard what you did with Jimmy and everything. That's great. I love it. Sticking up for yourself, And he says, you want to go to the WWF? I said, shoot, yeah. So he said, well, let me call Vince. So he goes in the back room. He calls Vince right there. And Vince tells me, he says, well, give me his number. I gave him my number. The next morning, Vince calls. I go up to the office, sitting in the office, and he shows me this book that looked kind of like a comic book with all these pictures in there. And at that time, I knew nothing about the WWF because we were so busy down there. I never seen Bill and Randy wrestle. I didn't know what the Demolition was or anything. So I looked at the concept and everything. He says, how would you like to do that? And I said, I would love it. And I said, who would I team up with? And he says, Bill Eadie. And I said, the Masked Superstar. And he goes, yeah. And right away, I knew, I was a Masked Superstar mark for, ever since I remember. And I thought, well, if I'm hooking up with him, I know it's going to be a top spot. So I was all fired up. And then he said, but I got to get Bill's okay. He's in Japan right now. And if he okays you, then you got a job here.
Wow.
So, and then he said too, he says, and if you don't take that job, we'll figure out something with you, you know? So, so I met with Bill and we just clicked right away. And we had our first match and it was like we were partners forever. It was like me and Ivan again, but it was me and Bill, you know, and but it was really hard leaving Crockett's territory because everybody was so incredible. But you know, it wasn't just the money, it was he screwed me, he lied to me. And if they did it one time, those promoters will do it to you a whole bunch of other times. So
Yep.
it's almost like maybe they wanted me to leave. I don't know, but I don't think so. I think he was just a real dickhead, is what it was.
Guys, in your first year, you're working with some of the biggest names in the WWF during an undefeated streak of about 6 months. And one team is the British Bulldogs, who have gone on to be the subject of some controversy due to some backstage incidents. What did you guys think of working with the Bulldogs?
Excellent. Had great times with them all the time. I mean, there's certain guys, and there are two of them, but we were very, very, very fortunate at that time. There were so many good teams to work with. And I've said it many times, and Barry has too. It's hard to have bad matches with certain teams. The Bulldogs, Martel and Tito, or Martel and his other partner. It just, Bulldogs were a dynamic team that did different stuff that you don't normally see, especially Dynamite.
You know, and what was great was we both got along with them outside the ring too, so that made a difference. So you were, you know, friends with them in the ring, and you know they would do anything we wanted them to do, and we would do anything they wanted us to do. So it was just a really good fit. And plus, they were great workers, incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, let's take a quick time out to talk about our fantastic sponsor, Blue Chew. It is the new year, and it's time for you to have better sex with Blue Chew. And they're putting their money where their mouth is, pal. They're offering you a month for free. The whole process is totally simple. You owe it to yourself to give this a try. You just sign up at BlueChew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door. You can take them anytime, day or night, so you can plan ahead or be ready when the opportunity arises. The best part? It's all done online. That means no more visits to the doctor's office, no more awkward, uncomfortable conversations, and no more waiting in line at the pharmacy. Now look, people ask me all the time, and it's always the same question: does Blue Chew really work? Well, let me tell you, pal, it's time for you to find out for yourself. People are going to be calling you Eagle Scout with the way that you're going to be pitching tents by the time Blue Chew is done with you. The folks at Blue Chew told me they're not going to stop until every man is bricked up like a brick house. That is their mission. They want to get you rock hard in the new year. You know, I said you owe it to yourself. Not only do you owe it to yourself, you also owe it to your partner. You could be missing out on the best sex of your entire life without even knowing about it. Come on, you got to give this a try. They say there is nothing sexier than confidence, and Blue Chew can help give you confidence where it counts. We can all relate to wanting to feel more confident, right? Especially in the bedroom, and Blue Chew's here for you. It's time, guys. Make life easier by getting harder and discover your options at BlueChew.com. We've got a special deal for our listeners. Try your first month of Blue Chew free. Just visit BlueChew.com and use our code SNAKE at checkout. You'll get your first month free. Just pay $5 shipping. Visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information, and we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring the podcast. Now, a 6-month undefeated streak for you two, pretty significant. Did it seem right away like Vince was like, "Okay, I'm gonna push you guys to the moon," or was it one of those things that he kind of warmed up to?
No, I think that, like I said, after the first initial 2 days, and then when Barry and I got together, uh, I think Vince knew. I mean, he mentioned to us that he was going to go 150% behind it because I think he knew that it was going to go because the crowd reaction was so positive as we entered, came through the curtains, going to the ring, and then once we start wrestling, uh, people were cheering at the beginning. I think, I'm not blowing our own horn, but I think out of respect, because they knew that once, and then once we got the music later on, it sort of set the stage for the whole atmosphere. And people knew that once we got in the ring, stuff was going to happen. And I think they respected that.
Now, Barry, I'm curious. Bill, you had been around Vince for a while, but Barry, you're just coming to the territory and getting to know Vince McMahon. What did you make of, the eccentric millionaire owner of the WWF?
Well, it was funny because I really got along with him right away the first time I ever met him. And I don't know if it was, he asked me a lot of questions about, my life outside wrestling, my powerlifting days. And, I was, 320 pounds, and, he's already heard stories about, my deadlifts and my benches and everything. So he already, kind of respected the weight training and everything because he was in it. And he's not much older than I am. And it was like we got along really well. So once I was up there, I could say hi to him and everything. And I was never, I didn't feel like he was my boss. And I don't know, it's kind of weird to say, but I don't think anybody is above me or you or anybody. I think we're all equal, and some people get better jobs. And you know what I'm saying? So
Yes,
it
sir.
was like I talked to him like he was normal. It wasn't like he was a boss. And that's how I talked to Dusty, and I talked to Jimmy Crockett and everybody, because, it's just the way I am. And so I think once we had our first match and he saw, this is going to work, we're right away, we were good partners. It was, it was great. I mean, he wasn't the Vince McMahon that he is nowadays. You know what I mean?
Before 1987 is over, the two of you are going to be part of a really significant event. It's the first ever Survivor Series pay-per-view that took place in November of that year. And you guys are part of a 10-on-10 match at the show. That is a lot of damn people in the ring all at once. What do you guys think of the concept?
Was that the one in Cleveland?
I think it was. I don't know that for sure, but man, it's 10 guys on one side, 10 guys on the other side. Seems
Yeah.
like, it has all the potential to be a cluster out there.
Well, I'm surprised, honest with you. I don't know if they reinforced the ring itself, but I'm sure they had to. But you're right. I mean that, and those are always different. It's almost like a mini battle royal, and they're difficult to organize and difficult to run smoothly. So, from what I remember, I think the match itself was pretty good. Considering all the, like you said, 20 people and a referee in there. So.
That's a lot. It's a lot to keep organized. And you guys are tag team experts. I mean, is it different trying to navigate a Survivor Series with all those different kind of opinions and, thought processes involved?
Well, I think that we were basically more concerned with controlling ourselves
Mm,
and a couple moves with a few select teams, because you're not going to have contact with 7 out of the 10 teams anyway. If you do that, if you have 4 out of 10, that's an enormous amount of contact. So the other people got to get in too. So you're only in there a limited amount of time.
right.
Yeah. When they tell you at the beginning, there's 20 minutes for the match, but you got all those guys. It's like, if you're out there for 5 minutes out of the 20, you're going to get some pretty serious heat. So you got to get in, get out, do whatever.
Now, your first WrestleMania appearance is going to be at WrestleMania 4, where the two of you defeat Rick Martel and Tito Santana with a little help from Mr. Fuji's Kane. Man, being part of WrestleMania, it's huge. What did you guys think of your first experience there as Demolition?
Well, when you look back on it was huge. But when you're doing it and you're involved in it and you're in the forest, you can't see all the trees because you're in the forest working. But as we get older and look back at all the opportunities we had, it was fantastic, and I'm very proud of what we were able to do.
Yeah. And what's really strange is, all the days that we're on the road. I mean, you do TV, and you might have 3 matches at TV, and then you drive somewhere else and have another TV. And So pretty soon you're wrestling 8 and 9 times in a week, and goes by 3, 4, 5, 6 months and everything. And then, you're kind of like, you got WrestleMania. It's like, oh yeah, now we got another show we got to go to. When you're in the mix of that, it's like it wasn't that big of a deal. And then after you look back and you go, holy cow, that's huge. There was only like 3 or 4 pay-per-views in a whole year, and that's the biggest one of the whole year. And then we win the titles there. I mean, now it sinks in that was a huge event,
And such a select few people get to participate in a WrestleMania as a professional wrestler. It's almost like being part of a Super Bowl. It's you're written into the history books just having been part of WrestleMania.
Exactly. And how many are there now? Like 40, 42?
I think the next one is 42.
So yeah, you're right. I mean, there's only a handful of people because a lot of them was the same individuals.
Yep.
So yeah, it like we said, when you look back, we were so busy working day to day, but when you look back now, it was a privilege and an honor to do it.
Yeah, it was.
Now, I mentioned Mr. Fuji there, and what did you guys think of being paired with him? It seems like everybody's got a Fuji story.
Well, we loved it. We actually asked to have Fuji as our manager. Prior to that, I don't know if a lot of the fans remember, we had Valiant, and his approach was a little comedic, and it really didn't fit the Demolition style. We were going out there and kicking people's butts and not worrying about names and this and that. And Johnny once in a while would crack a joke or during an interview or take focus off the activity in the ring. And we both felt that he wasn't devious enough and sinister enough. So we asked Vince if we could have Fuji, and he agreed. And Fuji sort of fit the mold. He would constructively critique our matches. He was in favor of the team, not himself. Everything that he did was calculated. And I don't know if a lot of people remember, he was very successful as an individual and a tag performer. So he helped, formulate some of our moves in the ring and told us what to do, what not to do, what to include, what not to ever include. So he was very beneficial.
And what was funny too is Valiant we didn't hang with him either. He was our manager and come out and do it. And then he had his friends that he would go with, and Bill and I would go. But once Fuji became our manager, we were all together all the time. So, I mean, it was a different situation. I don't know if you remember, feeling that, Bill. It was like,
yeah. And our decision wasn't based on, we didn't like Valiant.
Yeah, it wasn't that, but
it just did not, you hear the phrase, people coming out of left field with some of their statements.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Johnny was out of the stadium sometimes. And a lot of the, we're in there kicking somebody's butt and he's over there making a joke, or he's, we're doing an interview trying to be sinister and he cracks a comedy skit. Later on he was a comedian. Yeah. So maybe he was prepping for his stink pen, I don't know. But it just didn't work. And it wasn't negative Johnny. It was what's going to be best for Demolition.
Yeah, it just didn't click. And that was where I was so thankful to have Bill as my partner. He's the veteran, and he put this whole thing together, the Demolition, and what would work, what wouldn't work, and that was one of the things right there. When we talked about it, and he asked me, he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Yeah, you're right." So, and I'm glad you spoke up and said that, because I mean, it worked with Fuji. It might not have gone anywhere with Johnny.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the two of you were a couple badasses, and as the saying always goes in wrestling, a couple badass heels, eventually the fans are gonna start to get behind you because everybody likes a badass, and that's what happened. Survivor Series 1988, Fuji's gonna turn on you guys and side with the Powers of Pain, and you guys are baby faces. When did you guys start to feel the crowd getting behind you, and did you feel like this was the right time?
Well, to be honest with you, we didn't feel it was the right time, but we
Mm,
already had felt that the crowd was behind us. And there again, not blowing smoke, I think that they respected our performances. I think that they knew, like we said, excuse me, when the music started, we came out, we went to the ring. People said, "Oh my goodness, something's going to happen here, exciting." And I think that the office, a lot of times, people in the office, the booker, the matchmaker, whoever's in charge, will sit in the arena or walk around the various parts of the arena and they'll listen to the reaction of the crowd. They hear them cheering for us and rooting for us. And I think they mistakenly thought, well, gee, they love these guys and we got to turn them babyface. We got to make them good guys. Well, they didn't. And, I think that they respected us. They appreciated what was going on in the ring, but we could have been heels for a number of years longer. But I think that they thought, well, we got to make this move. And and people know that have a regular job, sometimes the boss or the bosses or the supervisors, they think they know everything, but they really don't know everything. Ask the workers sometimes.
mm-hmm.
And this could have been postponed for a year or at least longer, I think. And
Yeah.
Barry and I have talked about this, but I think they jumped the gun. So,
Yeah, and what's crazy is, our goal every night was to have the best match of the night on the card. That's what we strived for. And I think, when you come back in the locker room, if you had a great match, a good match, or if it was the shits, you know that. And I would say 99% of the time we'd go back there and it was like, holy shit, Bill, this is great. I mean, we love it. And the fans at home, they can appreciate that good match because you're hearing it out there. And I really believe that when we're announced coming to a town, as a fan, they got to go, oh yeah, the Demolition is on the card. There's going to be a good match against the Heart Foundation or whatever. And I think that drew a lot of money. And I think the office is, like Bill is saying, the crowd's getting with us and everything. And they're thinking, oh, we can sell some merchandise, we can do this and everything. And it really didn't care about us. It was what was best for them and the company. But we never worked any different. We were still heels and did all of our stuff and everything. But yeah, I think we could have just kept having a run like that, being heels, and it just turned. Whoever you worked with, they either boo you or cheer you, and
yeah.
that's kind of how it should have been.
Well, let's talk about Andre for a minute. He's become like a legitimate pop culture icon, and everybody seems to have a good Andre story. What can you guys tell us about being around the man?
Well, Andre was giving. If he liked you, he liked you. If he didn't like you, he wasn't mean, but he just didn't want to waste time. I often thought, and Barry and I have talked about this a number of times. I think he had a premonition that he wasn't going to live long, and in his mind, why waste time and effort with people who you don't want to be around with? No, don't mistreat them, but just be around those people that you like and you get friendship from. And unfortunately, it was true. He didn't live long. But Andre, if like I said, if he liked you, there wasn't anything he wouldn't do for you. And I just cherished the friendship that we had. He was not only a personal friend, he was a friend of my wife and my family. And I just have fond memories, and I really do miss him because there's quite a few individuals that have passed too soon in this business. Too many guys are passed now, and he's one of them. But I do miss him a lot.
And this is the kind of guy it was. He was he was filming Princess Bride, so he was away quite a while and worked a lot. And he had a commercial he was going to do here in the States, and he called us up and he said, "You want to do a Pizza Hut commercial?" And of course, we said, Oh, yeah, yeah. So he went to Vince and told Vince, he says, I want the Demolition to take my place. And we ended up getting the Pizza Hut commercial because of Andre. I
Wow.
mean, he just, he would always think of the people that he liked, and, he would, try to take care of you. And he was just a good guy,
Great to be on that guy's good side, right?
Yeah.
Here's one thing that I'll mention, and I thought about it many, many times. They have the Mount Rushmore of wrestling, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And nobody ever puts Andre on it. And
You're
he
right.
is so iconic. I mean, at that particular time, before Hulk Hogan, before The Warrior, before Stone Cold, not taking anything away from those guys, but why wouldn't you have Andre as one of those figures on Mount Rushmore? Everybody. He was the most well known athlete in the world at that time. Even above Ali and all these other guys. So that's one of my pet peeves. Because if I had one, and I wouldn't be able to, because it's not fair to different time frames of wrestling time frames. But of all those time frames, the one guy that I would have on Mount Rushmore would be Andre.
Yeah. And think of how he was in Japan, and he
Oh,
was in Europe, and, all over the world. He was, you know, unbelievable. Everybody knew who he was.
the one card that you wanted to be on was an Andre card. That's the one you knew you were going to make money.
And he would be in the dressing room with all the guys. You'd play cards with them, you do whatever, and he didn't have his own dressing room. Didn't he
One of the
loved
boys.
yeah, he loved being around the guys. He was just he was a fun guy.
You guys will face him and Haku at WrestleMania 6 in Toronto at the Sky Dome, one of the most significant shows in wrestling history. Man, working in the Sky Dome, a huge, huge crowd. I guess this would actually be the largest WrestleMania crowd that you guys had worked in front of at this point. What did you think of the experience there in Toronto?
Well, Toronto, I had been in Toronto years ago, many, many times, and always a good building, always a good crowd, always good reactions. And like you said, being in that dome, there again, when you're in it, it's just another match. But when you think back later on, you say, "My goodness, that was a fun time," and then you can cherish those moments. But I remember the crowd was very responsive. Yes.
Yeah, and that building was huge, because when we got in those little carts and you stand in there and drag, it took about 5 minutes to go from the back to the ring. That's how far it was.
Yep.
And then when you got in the ring and you hear that roar, it starts off by the ring, and then all of a sudden you can hear it, and it took 10 seconds before you could hear the people in the upper crowd clapping. And the funnest thing in wrestling is when you can wrestle your friends. And Haku and Andre were two of our very good friends, and we had such a good time. It was a great match and a lot of fun.
Not long after WrestleMania 6, you guys are going to go back to being heels, and Crush is going to join the two of you as a member of Demolition. What can you guys tell us about Crush becoming part of the team?
Well, the situation was that I was approached by Vince to go into a position of a behind the scenes guy, an agent, and they were going to bring in Crush to replace me. But prior to that, I had an allergic reaction to shrimp due to the fact that I had been back and forth to Japan almost 40 trips. So we were going to a movie, and I had a shrimp dinner and had an allergic reaction, anaphylactic reaction. Well, they panicked and brought in Crush, and we didn't know. I mean, I don't know if Barry knew him before. I didn't know him before, but he was a great guy. He was just inexperienced to the level that we were at that time. I think he was it Oregon or Washington, Barry?
Yeah, well, yeah, Portland, Oregon territory.
And he was one of their top guys. And, one of the things that we prided ourselves in, we did our interviews, it was one take. We didn't mess up. They tell us the time, tell us our opponents, and we went from there. Well, when Crush came in, he wasn't used to that. Well, now he's put in a position, he's not one of the top guys in Oregon. He's one of the top guys in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So now there's a lot of pressure on him. And then add on to that, you got to do all these interviews. And periodically he would screw up a segment of the interview. And then the guys are very vicious and they jumped on him. Demolition doesn't do that, blah, 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 blah. They had one take guys. Well, now in the back of his mind, he's worried about screwing up again. And inevitably, you're going to screw up.
Yep.
So there was a lot of pressure on him. So, but as far as being congenial and being one of us and being Demolition and stuff, he was a great guy to be around. There again, died too soon.
Yeah.
Barry, did you feel the same way about Brian Adams as far as like, were you guys able to kind of bring him up and bring him along and train him so that he could be more of a professional?
Well, yeah, Brian was the type of guy that he just sucked it all in. I mean, he was really, really a good guy and he could do everything. But, what was hard was, Axe and Smash were it. And then all of a sudden, Bill's on the sidelines, and then you bring in another guy. Now it's really not the same tag team. It's hard to replace. How do you replace Bill? You know what I mean?
Right.
So he really had a hard time there doing that, but he did a really good job. We had good matches and everything, but it was the start of where the Demolition was going down because it wasn't the Demolition anymore. And it would have been like the Bulldogs. You get rid of Davey Boy and you bring somebody else in. I mean, they're not the Bulldogs anymore, and that's kind of how it was. So that was kind of the start of the downfall with the Demolition when all that was happening. I'll tell you what was great about what we did was we worked with the greatest tag teams ever. I think it was an unbelievable territory, and we had worked with Hulk and Andre and Jake the Snake and Duggan, and we worked with everybody up there at that time, and we had a really, really fun time.
And the nice thing is when you go to these conventions and signings and you see the guys, and some of them you haven't seen literally for 10, 15 years or so. And after you start talking, after about 5 minutes, just like you saw them yesterday. So they're still good friends. And you're still talking about stories that happened 15 years ago, but in our minds, it was just yesterday or 2 weeks ago. So it's always nice to see that the conventions are great for the fans, but they're also great for the talent too.
Kind of like having a class reunion, every couple
Yeah,
months or whatever, right?
exactly. It's a nice fraternity to be in.
Well, gentlemen, this episode was really impressive. What a pleasure to talk to you both. I really, really appreciate all the time today. And folks, you have got to go out of your way to check out Demo Pod with these two. Again, it's available on YouTube. It's available on all podcast platforms. So I will put a link in the description of this podcast so you guys can go and find it. But much like Jake and Ted and Hacksaw and all the guys that I work with, you guys are still out there making the towns, right?
Yeah, we're very fortunate. It's been nice.
Yeah, you look at what we're going right now. It's like the fans are incredible. I mean, you kind of got to pinch yourself and say, how can we still be out there doing all this? It's great, but then yet it's a lot of work too.
It goes to show the kind of impact that you guys had on fans. And folks, if you want to meet Demolition, they're going to be, and I'm going to put the links to all these in the description of the podcast. They're going to be in Beckley, West Virginia, Fanboy Expo in Kentucky this year, Wildwood, New Jersey, The Gathering in Charlotte, which is a really big one. You guys are heading to Albuquerque, Waterloo, Iowa for the big Hall of Fame event that they do out there, that TNT Hall of Fame. And then a huge one, 80s Wrestling Con in Gatineau, Quebec. Man, awesome to see you guys still out there taking the time to be with your fans.
Well, it's nice. It's nice because we can sit back, relax, and chat with the fans, and that's the nice part. Hearing the stories and getting questions from them. So we weren't able to do that before, and it's really nice.
So, Marcus, where are you from then? Where do you live?
I live in Pittsburgh.
Oh,
Oh
Pittsburgh. That's
wow!
where
Well,
Bill grew up.
I'm from Brownsville originally.
Are you really?
Yeah,
How about that? I actually
yeah,
grew up in Elk County in Pennsylvania, so up there in the Allegheny Mountains. But my wife is from this area, so I moved here about 10 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
Nice, nice. Well, tell Jake and Duggan and Ted. Tell them all we said hi. We see them on the road every once in a while, but all great guys.
I hear them all put you guys over all the time as well. So yes, I'll definitely pass that along. And good luck with the demo pod. I'm so happy that you guys are doing this. It's such a cool thing for fans and a great way for them to get some insight into you guys. And man, this episode was a blast. So I know you guys have got plenty more stories to tell over there.
All right. Well, thank you, my friend.
Yeah, and thank all the fans too.